Oh, hi, David.
Hi.
Thanks for taking the time to meet with me. So, as you know, we've got our golf tournament, the Golf for Good roundup this weekend, where we've got all of these great golf courses in the community coming together, asking golfers to round up their green fees a little bit and donate them to us in lieu of our golf tournament this year. So, you're the director of early learning and family services here at the Opportunity Council. And I was just thinking, we talk about our events, and when we're talking about our golf tournament, we say we're raising money for kids in our community. We're raising money for kids under 5. And I thought it might be nice to just talk a little bit about what those funds are used for. What do those make possible?
Happy to do that. We really appreciate the golfers who've supported us for years. Our department serves really from prenatal times through to about the age of 12 in a variety of programs. And most of our programs are means tested, meaning they're geared towards families of very low income. So we have grants certainly that pay a lot of the core costs of doing our programs, but there are many things that don't fit into the rather rigid silos of public funding sources. So the golf tournament proceeds, or in this case, the roundup, will help us fill in some of those cracks. For example, we have children in our birth to 3 program that are either born medically fragile or have a developmental disability. And oftentimes that means parents have to drive all the way to Seattle Children's or somewhere to get some of the interventions that their child needs. And in even good times, quote unquote, for our families, that's a stretch. But these days, when many folks are seeing underemployment or unemployment, it's really a burden for them to afford even the gas to drive down to their child. So this fund, for example, has helped us get infants, medically fragile, who need to go back down to Seattle, a way down there by providing some gas for the car for the parents to do that, as opposed to having to pay for a very expensive transport service.
Can you explain a little bit more about what medically fragile might mean?
Sure. Some children are born prematurely, and that oftentimes leads to sometimes either acute or ongoing issues for the child. So if they are born 2 months before full gestation, that means that not all of their body parts are fully formed. So they need a little more time to mature, if you will, to what people think of as a typically developing baby. And so sometimes, having spent some time in the neonatal intensive care unit in children's, when the baby is stable enough and the family is ready as they can be, they are discharged to come home. So now they're 100 and some miles away from that security blanket of the hospital. Their baby has maybe electronic equipment or needs a feeding tube. There can be all sorts of things that a child has going on. And the parents are pretty much on their own until they can connect with a healthcare provider up here. So our staff goes into the home and works with them on various therapies, everything from swallowing and all the kind of therapies that sometimes a premature infant will need, to try to de-stress that family and to make sure that child develops to his or her potential. So we can't do everything up here in Bellingham, so oftentimes families do have to get back down to Seattle for some of the interventions, and these unrestricted dollars help them do that.
Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah, I'm just thinking about when I first brought my kids home from the hospital and feeling in charge all of a sudden with this tiny human that I'm solely responsible to keep alive and help thrive. And to add that extra burden of being medically fragile on top of it, is any little piece helps with the stress of that, right? So.
And I think many people also are not familiar with how prevalent postpartum depression can be. So sometimes the mom in particular is not only dealing with the very acute needs of her child, but she's also wrestling with her own emotional challenges until her body kind of gets back to normal. And so that's the other thing our staff do, is they help support that mental health dimension of many moms who are dealing not only with a baby or multiple children, but their own feeling of well-being at the same time.
Yeah, I think that's great to have that moment of connection for any new mom to kind of have that moment to know that you're not alone. And I think in a lot of ways that's in addition to the funds that the golf tournament raises, right? That's part of the way that we as a community can say to these young families dealing with so much that, hey, we're here for you.
Absolutely.
We all care.
And even in our programs that serve older children, for example, in our preschool program or in our other birth to 3 programs, families just come upon hard times. So we've used the golf funds to get a mom and her baby and her preschooler out of their car and into stable housing in the middle of winter when there was no other alternative for her because all the shelters were full. In another case, most people aren't aware that if you have a son who's 12 or older and you have domestic violence happen in your home, you can't go to one of the women's shelters and keep your son with you because they, for various reasons, don't have males in the buildings beyond the age of 12. So if we want to keep that family together, we've had to use resources to find alternative lodging for them and to safely get out of the domestic violence situation, but also not have to break up your family in order to save your family.
Yeah, so it sounds like even under our sort of normal circumstances, there's this wide range of issues and challenges that these funds are really critical to meeting. And obviously, we're in the middle of a pandemic. We're having this conversation virtually instead of face to face. So I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about sort of the impacts that COVID have had on our families and maybe the ways that these funds that we're raising this coming weekend are going to help families.
Absolutely. Well, as you can imagine, given the nature of our programs, we're used to seeing families who are struggling and supporting them that. But since the pandemic began, we have really seen the volume of families who are really struggling, and even families who we've seen for a couple of years as their child develops, who are doing fine, but suddenly they're knocking on the door saying, I need help that they've never needed before. In some cases, it's maybe they can't make the copay, even if they're getting subsidized childcare, they can't meet the copay because of the loss of work hours or complete loss of jobs. Food insecurity has definitely gone up. And we work very closely with food banks and other sources so as not to duplicate. But many of our young people have food restrictions. You can imagine if you're a young child with medically challenging situations, you might have texture or other issues, or you can't just eat normal food out of the grocery store. Or we have children with allergies. And your typical food bank box doesn't provide those things necessarily. So we've had to also step up and use unrestricted resources sometimes to supplement what's in a food box from a food pantry so that the child's health is not jeopardized by a food allergy. Many parents right now, as schools have decided to not reopen in person, are also scrambling to try to figure out their childcare situation because the reality is that the families that we work with, most of them don't have the privilege of telecommuting to work. So they end up having to figure out a way that they're going to maintain their job. And even if they are a family of some means, they might be an essential worker who still has to go to work. Now there's no one, that whole school day time period is uncovered in terms of supervision of their children because they're not at school. And somebody's expected to be at home sort of guiding the educational process as their children learn virtually. So it's this huge new combination of stresses on families. And so we've been helping families afford childcare. Fortunately, we have some emergency childcare vouchers that can allow families to get some coverage. Or if they've fallen behind because they're unemployed or underemployed, we can also get them a voucher to make sure they can hang on to that prized seat in a childcare because we're a childcare desert in this county, and especially if you have an infant or a toddler, it's really hard to find childcare to begin with. And what you definitely don't want to do is lose that space for a lack of ability to pay and then have to go to the end of the line and wait until another opening comes along. So these are all sort of those glue dollars that we use to keep families whole and moving forward despite what circumstances they've fallen into.
I like that. I like that phrase, glue dollars, right? It's sort of the parts that they kind of help our families stay cohesive. They help our community stay cohesive, and they're, yeah, just those unexpected funds that are so critical to our day-to-day health and our families' day-to-day health. So.
Exactly.
Great. Well, I don't want to take too much of your time because I know you're awfully busy right now. So thank you so much for taking the time to chat with us today. Hopefully this is helpful for people. Yeah. Right.
Sure.
And the one other thing is I would be remiss if I wasn't thanking our amazing sponsors who've really stepped up in this time in kind of unexpected ways. So we've had some great community sponsors like People's Bank, IMCO, Heritage Bank, Northwest Fence, the Smart Association, Bury Funston Mumford PLLC, Cigna Health Management Administrators, Phillips 66, and North Coast Credit Union. So just a huge group really stepped up.
They're all rock stars in my eye, because we definitely, obviously, were thrown a wrench when we couldn't do the tournament the way we've always done it this year. And so we sort of assumed that we would be without some of that annual support, and the fact that these sponsors have stepped up really on fairly short notice has just been wonderful. We thank them all.
Yep. 3 months ago, I don't think we were fairly sure we weren't going to be able to do anything. And these sponsors stepped up. All of our golf courses stepped up. And we're just really excited for this weekend to see what comes.
I'll be out there.
All right. Thanks, David.
Thank you.
Have a great day.
You too.